when you get these readings, or even let's say Reiki, like Reiki is something that can be done at a distance. I remember a long time ago getting a reading, and I was like, oh, we should do this on FaceTime so that we can see each other. And the moment that she needed to tap in, she did what I did 10 minutes ago. I closed my eyes and I tapped in.
I watched you do it. Yeah.
I'm receiving, I'm actually becoming aware of the information in the field as opposed to learning it. So,
do you know what you were doing? When you close your eyes, the amplitude and location of alpha brainwaves in the brain changes dramatically. So if you want to have people talk about, alpha brainwaves are very common and very powerful, and they're nothing special unless they're organized in a certain way. But when you close your eyes, your alpha waves go up a lot and you looked upwards. So if you look up with your eyes closed, especially focusing on your third eye, if I had electrodes on your head, we would detect you going into a very powerful alpha state. Which is why when I'm teaching people these neurofeedback things, what I'm doing is I'm putting them in dark chambers because darkness helps, and I'm teaching them some things you do to make it even more powerful. But what you did to tap in was you just basically probably tripled the power of your alpha brainwaves. And if I looked at your brainwaves, I would predict we would see unusually strong amplitude of waves. I don't know how organized they'd be, and probably more than a little bit of a lower level brainwave that would probably be more organized than normal. And because of what you do for a living, because you're highly intuitive. And I mean, I picked that up the first time we talked, like you're paying attention to stuff. So, but that's happening. In order to tune in, I do the same thing. I'm like, you close your eyes. I don't know, sometimes I do this, and you kind of look up, and then there's something you connect to. And that's why I said, look at you download.
Yeah.
So here's the question. Have you just done that since you were a kid? Did you just know how to do that? Did someone teach that to you? Because how did you get that skill?
That's a great question. I mean, I can remember being in go-karting I started when I was 10, but I probably was, 12 when I remember maybe doing it, because I just don't remember doing it right away. But I would sit there and just visualize perfect laps. And no one ever told me to do that. No one ever said, hey, sit down and do some visualization techniques and skills. And I just decided I would visualize the perfect laps, and I imagined the go-kart feeling exactly like I wanted, hitting my marks exactly correctly. And so that's kind of the first memory I have of that. But I honestly, I can't, no, I don't really feel like I've been taught. Even my sort of spiritual awarenesses to my own patterns of my being and why I am like I am. I mean, I have therapists, trust me, but it's never, the breakthroughs don't happen with them. They happen on my own. They're a little spontaneous, and they're sort of like there's a trigger. But yeah, things come to me.
So do you see like past lives and stuff like that? Or do you have readings of those?
Sure. I actually was in Sedona this weekend. And
oh my God, I'm going there next week.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. I want to know what you're doing, because I want to know if I can come. And I was with this girl that I was mentioning, is very, very, very tapped in. And I did a past life regression, but I did it in a different way. I've had I've had one other past life regression. And it was basically information coming at me, and she tapped into the field and told me things. And I'd ask questions. And
oh, that's cool. I like an Akashic Records reading kind of thing.
Pretty much. That's what it felt like, more like, as opposed to what I had this weekend, which was more of a past life regression that I did. So
where you experienced the life?
Yeah, where I experienced the life. I saw the life. I told the story of the life, as opposed to someone telling me a story. Yeah. And I was put into like this is an interesting thing. I want to know what the science of this is, because you're so well balanced between the two. So they took me into like a deep meditation, slowing everything down. And I left, I was gone. But as soon as he asked the first question, I answered. And I don't remember what was being said before that point in time. It was just sort of like a meditation to get me slowed down and tapped in. And so I asked him when it was over with, I said, did I miss a question that you asked? He's like, no. He said, as soon as I asked it, you answered. And I was like, whoa, because I was gone, but I heard the question and answered. And that's when I came to, was like at the end of his sentence, and I answered the question, but I was gone before that. So what was happening with my brain waves at that point in time that I could hear him, but I wasn't coherent. Like I wasn't with it. I wasn't present, but I was still hearing him.
When you say you weren't present, were you unaware of your body?
Yeah, I was like, it was as if I felt like I was asleep.
Okay, you were asleep, but you still felt like you were in your body. You didn't
Yeah.
like dissolve into the universe kind of thing.
No, I wasn't having sort of an out of body experience that I was like, oh, hang on a second, let me come back into my body to, answer this
Okay.
question. It's just blank. It was like a blankness. And then all of a sudden the question was asked and I was like, answer the question.
Okay. So you had dropped into really the subconscious state, the dreaming state, and in neuroscience. And keep in mind, I'm not a neuroscientist. I just helped to develop like a neuroscience company, but my training is not a neuroscience. I'm just very interested because I've been doing neurofeedback on myself for 25 years, which is why I can do a lot of what I can do. So there's a state that you're in when you're daydreaming, and when you're having a real dream, it's even deeper. And these are different levels and locations in the brain of what neuroscientists will simplify as the theta state, which is just a range of things. But that's like saying, oh, you're listening to music that is in the C chord. Like, well, was it polka or was it Metallica? Because those are kind of different, but they both can be in the C chord, right? So what we don't really have good language because it's all complex math. So what you did is you dropped into a portion of the world of theta, which is a very big world, and that's the world of the subconscious. That's where you connect to the collective consciousness. That's where you go to see the Akashic records. And when I say to go there, you have to know how to play the right music, for lack of a better word, the right patterns within that. So you'll see people saying, well, I did some alpha or I did some theta, and like, well, okay, like what song did you play? And I don't know. Well, that's because that's the hard part. So you ended up installing that app, let's say, or using that app that allowed you to be at the very upper level of theta, where you're dipping into dreamland, dissociative, but you had enough alpha present that you were still able to hear and reply.
So where are we going as humans? And are we returning or are we going somewhere new?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Some of this is just opinion, but it's opinion based on, math and science and also a lot of spiritual stuff and experiential. Information field theory seems to explain the world the most, where everything is actually a field of information. So all the stuff that we see and sense, including time, including our bodies and all that stuff, is representations of information. And there's some math that proves this. And it's the one explanation that explains a lot of even those yogic cities we talked about before, that explains some of the quantum effects that we know are real. And this isn't like quantum. We're like, hey, let's do a quantum. Like quantum is misused all over the place in marketing. Have you had any quantum prune juice lately? Because I'm sure there is some, right? But in quantum biology, you get a PhD in this. It's a hard science trying to figure out how electrons behave in biology differently than they do in semiconductors. Like it's super technical stuff above my pay grade. But information field theory explains a lot of that stuff, and it says that consciousness itself is a field, and ours just evolved so that when our field is in these meat suits, then we use the user interface that's in these meat suits. And there are some people who are atheists who are listening who say, well, that's not true. There's no such thing as reincarnation, and I only get one time through. Okay, cool. I would argue that there's emerging evidence that probably isn't true, but there's a very rational reason that you should believe in past lives.
Why?
Here's what it is. Okay. And this is why I chose, as a computer science guy who was raised as an atheist. Okay, so I didn't have a particular spiritual bent to what I did. In fact, I thought anyone who believed in anything spiritual was an idiot until I was about 30 and just had a few wake-up calls. It's like, oh, maybe there's something to learn here.
Here's to being open-minded.
There you go, right? So if reincarnation is real, then I don't need to be afraid of dying because it's just starting the video game over again. It's inconvenient. Okay. Now I can live my life without as much fear, so I can make better decisions from a state of consciousness and thought. Now, if I'm wrong, I won't know it. Okay? So I win either way, right? So it is provably stupid to not believe in reincarnation just because reincarnation as a concept creates more freedom in your life now. And if it's the only life you have, great. Welcome to more freedom. And if it's real, then great. You win. You cannot lose by choosing to believe in it, even with no evidence.
So religion's a trap.
I think organized religion has some serious limitations, because what it's doing is installing a lens on reality that you didn't choose. And this is why most religions are like, can we have them for the first 7 years of life? Because after that,
subconscious programming.
Yep. And then you can undo that. And that's a lot of what I've done. I spent 6 months plus of my life with electrodes on my head, going in and turning off alerts that come from organized religion, that come from society, that come from pop culture, that come from bullies, that come from the best intentioned parents on the planet still screw up all the time because they're human, right? So you go through and you turn off all that. So the goal is to be as little emotionally reactive to negative things as possible. What I believe is that when we're in these bodies, in fact, I don't just believe this, I can prove it. You're not the observer of reality, right? You've heard this thing, the observer effect, Schrodinger's cats. Okay. Yeah. So for people listening, if you have something that might happen, when someone pays attention to it, it happens. And if they don't pay attention to it, if there's no observer, then it just continues being a possibility forever. And this is provable with like hard scientific radiographic paper. It's incredibly mind-boggling. So I mean, if no one hears the tree fall in the forest to make a sound kind of thing, it's like Zen koan land, but it's real. So if that's going on, and that's a part of our reality, remember earlier, I mentioned that your brain doesn't get a signal of reality until at least 240 milliseconds after something happens. So who's observing it? Who's observing it? It turns out the frontline observer with its own consciousness is a subcellular component of your cells called the mitochondria. They're not power plants in your cells. They're environmental sensors in your cells that sense the environment, then decide whether they're going to make electricity or neurotransmitters or sex hormones or inflammatory signaling molecules. Oh, you mean there's billions and billions of these things? There's between 500 and 15,000 mitochondria in every one of your cells. That's not a red blood cell. So your body has way more of those than there are cells in your body. And those things were ancient bacteria that, well, I would say they moved into the cells that are us and took over 2 billion years ago, and they're still driving the show because they sense reality, they decide what to do, and then we take credit for it a quarter second later. That's the seed of intuition. It's also the seed of manifestation because they're the environmental sensors. They're the first line observers of reality. And when you see the guys from The Secret, many of whom I've gotten to know over the course of years, and you look at Napoleon Hill's work, you look at the way you visualize when you were 10 years old, you were manifesting the shit out of things, Danica, and you were using your mitochondria to do it. You were teaching them to program their interface to reality to look for success instead of to look for failure or lack of love or whatever the hell bad programming you got somewhere. So what I've had to do, probably because I had really bad programming, was go through and reprogram all that stuff so that my mind automatically, and my body and my tissues and my cells and my mitochondria automatically look for the things I want in my life. I'm still working on that, by the way. But
total working by here. Yeah, high five to the humility of it.